How do you disappear without a trace in a world that's just starting to keep digital receipts? That is the question at the center of this box. Can you smell that? It's that specific scent of basement damp paper and oxidized Scotch tape. This is a file that hasn't been fully breathed in since the late 90s. We are looking at the declassified records of the Foster disappearance, August 1984, Shaker Heights, Ohio. It's a humid, heavy summer, the kind where the air feels like a wet wool blanket. Arthur and Helen Foster, both 74, pillars of their community, disappear from their pristine colonial home on a Tuesday afternoon. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just 2 half-finished glasses of iced tea on the porch and a missing dark blue Buick LeSabre. If you were a detective in 1984, you'd look at this and think they just went for a drive. But then you see the daughter's statement. Marion Foster. She's the one who found the house empty. She tells the police her parents never left without their heart medication. They never left the door unlocked. And most importantly, they were terrified of their own son. Look at this Polaroid, Sarah. It's grainy. The colors are shifting toward that vintage yellow, but you can see the tension in Patrick Foster's face. This was taken at a family barbecue just months before they vanished. Patrick was the golden boy who turned lead, a failed med school student, a collapsed business owner, and by 1984, an inmate at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution, serving time for a series of high-end white-collar frauds. But here is the first loop, the first thing that makes your skin crawl. On the weekend his parents vanished, Patrick wasn't in his cell. He had been granted a 72-hour compassionate furlough, a weekend pass.
There it is.
He was supposed to be staying at a halfway house in Columbus, checking in every 6 hours. But if you look at the logs from that weekend, the signatures for Patrick Foster look just a little too rushed, a little too shaky. The detectives, Miller and Vance, their notes are typed on an old IBM Selectric. You can feel the strike of the keys in the paper. They knew Patrick had a motive. Arthur and Helen had just filed a lawsuit against their own son while he was behind bars. They were stripping him of his inheritance, taking back the deed to a multi-unit apartment complex in Cincinnati that was his only source of future income. Patrick was looking at getting out of prison and walking straight onto the street with a $100,000 debt. He had everything to lose. But motive isn't a murder conviction, especially when you don't have a body. In the history of the Ohio justice system up to that point, a __quote_0__ homicide conviction was almost unheard of. It was a ghost story. You need a corpus delicti. You need proof a crime actually happened. And Patrick, he was smart. Too smart. Listen to this audio tape. This is the first interrogation, August 30th, 1984. You can hear the hum of the reel-to-reel and the scratch of a lighter. Patrick sounds bored. He's telling the detectives he hasn't seen his parents since Christmas of '83. He says they're probably on a spontaneous trip to Florida.
You have to believe me.
He tells them to stop wasting his time because his furlough is over.
We both know
and
you're
he's going back
Foster.
to
Where
quote
is it?
1, which is what he called prison. But look at Detective Miller's handwritten observation in the margin. He writes, quote 2, a friend he refuses to name, a barbecue
This whole
no one
thing is a
else
setup.
attended.
We know you were there.
The police go to the Foster house. They find 2 spades missing from the garage. They find a roll of heavy-duty plastic sheeting gone from the basement. And then the breakthrough. A single crystal Scotch glass in the kitchen sink. In 1984, DNA testing was the stuff of science fiction, but they had blood typing. They found a smudge of saliva on the rim of that glass. It matched Patrick's type. It proved he was in that house during his furlough, standing in the kitchen while his parents' iced tea was still sweating on the porch. He lied. He was there. But again, where are Arthur and Helen? The police dragged the local quarries. They sent divers into the Cuyahoga River. They searched the woods of the metro parks. Nothing. 6 months pass. The case goes cold. The files get filed away in the basement where we found them. Patrick goes back to prison for his fraud charges, smug, thinking he's committed the perfect crime. But the perfect crime always has one loose thread. And in this case, it wasn't a witness or a weapon. It was a $20 parking ticket from a small town called St. Ignace, Michigan. It's June 1985, nearly 10 years before the internet would have linked these systems. Marion Foster is going through her parents' mail, which had been forwarded to a P.O. box. She finds a final notice from the Mackinac County clerk. A dark blue Buick LeSabre with Ohio plates was ticketed for obstructing a fire hydrant near the ferry docks in St. Ignace on August 28, 1984. That's 4 days after the disappearance. That's 300 miles north of the crime scene. St. Ignace is the gateway to the Upper Peninsula, a vast, rugged wilderness of pine forests and limestone caves. This changes everything. Miller and Vance drive through the night to the Michigan border. They realize that if the car was in St. Ignace, Patrick didn't just kill them, he transported them.
This is where
They start checking the ferry manifests for the boats crossing over to Mackinac Island or the Drummond Island lines. And they find it. A passenger manifest from August 29th. A man traveling under the name Freddie Foster. He bought a discounted student ticket.
But wait.
Patrick was 32, but he still had his old Ohio State University ID in his wallet. He was cheap. That's the narcissist's fatal flaw, Jack. He thought he was so much smarter than everyone else that he couldn't bring himself to pay full price for a ferry ticket, even while disposing of his parents' bodies. The detectives find a couple from Youngstown who were on that same ferry. We have their sworn depositions right here.
Where you were.
They remember him. They describe a man who looked feral. He was disheveled, smelling of wood smoke and old sweat, pacing the deck of the ferry while everyone else was looking at the sunset. He approached them, asking if he could hitch a ride in their car once they docked, so he wouldn't have to pay the foot passenger fee. He was desperate to disappear into the tree line. This is the __quote_5__ of the case. Everyone was looking for bodies in Ohio, but Patrick had driven 6 hours through the night, crossing state lines, pushing that Buick through the humid Michigan darkness with his parents in the trunk. The trial in 1986 was a media circus. It was the __quote_6__ for that small Ohio county. Patrick sat there in a cheap suit, leaning back, smirking at the prosecution. He thought he was untouchable. His defense was simple, quote 7. But the prosecution built a mountain of quote 8, circumstantial evidence.
Look at me.
The blisters, the missing spades, the DNA on the glass, the ferry ticket. And the most chilling piece of evidence? A letter Patrick wrote from his cell just weeks before the disappearance. It's right here. The ink is fading, but the malice is sharp. He wrote to his father, quote 9. The jury deliberated for 3 days. In a landmark decision that is still cited in law schools today, they found him guilty of 2 counts of aggravated murder without a single bone ever being recovered. He was sentenced to life. He spent the next decade in a maximum security facility, maintaining his innocence, filing appeal after appeal. He was a model prisoner, quiet, calculating, still playing the long game. Then, in 1997, something broke. Maybe it was the weight of the silence, or maybe it was one last attempt to manipulate the system. Patrick called Detective Miller, who was now a captain, and told him he wanted to talk. We have the transcript of that 1997 confession. It's chilling because of how clinical it is. He describes the argument in the kitchen. He describes the heat. He says he didn't mean to kill them, but once it happened, he knew he had to be methodical. He admitted to driving the Buick to a remote stretch of logging forest near Trout Lake, Michigan. He told the police he buried them in a shallow grave beneath a lightning-struck cedar tree and then set the car on fire to destroy the evidence. The police flew him up there in handcuffs. They spent 2 weeks with ground-penetrating radar and excavation teams. They found the car. It was a rusted, blackened skeleton of a Buick LeSabre, swallowed by the forest floor. But the cedar tree, the lightning strike, it was like he was describing a dream. They dug up half an acre of forest. They found nothing. No remains, no clothing, no trace of Arthur and Helen Foster. Patrick Foster is still alive, rotting in a cell, and he still refuses to give up the actual location. He gave them the car to prove he did it, to show them he was the master of the narrative, but he kept the bodies for himself. He wanted the final word. He wanted to ensure that Helen and Arthur never got a headstone. As we sit here in 2026,
cheers, everyone,
looking at these 1984 files, the mystery isn't, quote, 11 did it. We know who. The mystery is the sheer, cold-blooded arrogance of a man who could turn his own parents into a ghost story and then refuse to tell the ending. This isn't just a murder case. It's an archival autopsy of a narcissist who almost won. And in a way, as long as those bodies are still out there in the Michigan wilderness, he's still winning. If you're ever driving through the Upper Peninsula and you see an old logging road that looks like it hasn't been touched since the 80s, just remember Patrick Foster's blisters. Remember the spades. And remember that some secrets don't just stay buried. They stay hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to find the right file.